Namaste.
Good to see you, and I hope you've had a good week. We're admitting some more people. So we have come to the last of our sessions, and I want to thank you and admire you for your energy and persistence in these 3-hour sessions that have lasted through all of January. And I hope when you look back on it, or even now, you're finding elements of value in it, which probably will be different for each person. And actually, the last part of what we do today, I'd love to, in a certain sense, go around the room, although I don't want to put anybody on the spot who doesn't feel like sharing, but invite people to share with us and to affirm within yourself whatever has been of value this month. And I'll kind of review some of the things we've been doing just as a reminder. Today, we've in a certain sense outrun the Dickens text, A Christmas Carol, because we've done at least to some degree, the notion of Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future, or as it's called, Christmas yet to come. However, it feels to me like there's something left to do, which is in a way a pull back from the story, maybe going to its larger intent as a Christmas story, which means that it has a strong spiritual element to it, even though there's not a lot of God talk in A Christmas Carol. There's much more of a focus on kind of social justice, the Christian spirit in practice, and taking the Christmas holiday to really redress the economic inequities and the alienation between people. But each ghostly visitation is also called not just a ghost, but a spirit, and obviously connected with Christianity and the birth of Christ. There's this sense of kind of the divine, the spiritual coming into the world and permeating it. So it does not seem so kind of univocally Christian, what we're doing this month. And I may have mentioned, I myself am not even a Christian. I'm a Jew, although I'm still in that kind of Judeo-Christian tradition. Today, I would love to take those spiritual messages and inflect them in an Eastern direction, with a particular focus on Hinduism as an example, a little bit of Buddhism, maybe a little bit of Taoism, and also to reflect on, in addition to the aging body and honoring the process of aging and honoring elderhood, what is that part in us that is ageless? It feels like it transcends simply defining ourselves according to our chronological age or as an elder. So we're going to talk a little bit about, in this course on having the time of our lives, a little bit about timelessness, being beyond time. And I'd like to, at a certain point, do kind of guided meditation in relation to that. So I don't know if that makes sense to people. I hope so. And I hope you find value in it. So before we go on to new material, each week we have a little bit of what could be called homework, which is purely discretionary. And some people might, kind of focus on, others might forget. But when we left off last week, we were talking about Christmas future, Christmas yet to come. And it kind of led us into reading that poem, When I'm an Old Woman, I Shall Wear Purple. And it led us into reflecting on two different lists, the so-called bucket list of the things we want to have happen in our life, not just kind of the special things like the trip to Paris, but just even the everyday and relational experiences we want to weave into the life that remains to us. And also what, with your permission, we call the bucket list, which would sort of be the opposite. The things we want to let go of, the things we want to lessen or eliminate, whether they're outside tasks, responsibilities, activities, or whether they're inside thought processes and emotional states that are neurotic and distressing for no good purpose. And I think I said, in the week to come, you might want to either reflect further on these lists, and you might even want to practice a little, as Jenny Joseph's poem, When I'm an Old Woman, I Shall Wear Purple says, but maybe I ought to practice a little now. And I'm just wondering if over the course of the week, anybody reflected further on this, or anybody practiced a little bit something that was on their bucket list, or stayed away from something that was on their other list. So once again, we can either put up digital hands if you want to speak, or you can raise your hand, or you can just start speaking, whatever's comfortable. And you can also put a message in the chat area if that is more comfortable than sharing verbally. Anybody? I'm going to wait a minute in uncomfortable silence, because sometimes that provokes somebody who's silent and tolerant to say, damn it, I'll say something. Okay, well, maybe I'm the person most uncomfortable with silence. So I'll assume that no news is good news, or people don't choose to share on it. But at least we've kind of had a reminder of where we were last week, and now we can pick up this week. I do see a chat message from Laura. I thought more about it. I'd like to explore more of the southeast of the US. Cool. Anybody else, once again, thought more about it or started to practice a little now? Christine.
Yes, I wasn't able to be here last week, but I watched the whole session when it was sent around. So thank you very much for sending that, Ruby. I really liked the idea of the bucket list. I guess I've been keeping a bucket list for a number of years, but the situation has really changed for me because now I have a lot of caregiving responsibilities. So thinking about the bucket list, there were two things that came to mind. First of all, not worrying about what I look like in terms of how other people see me or what they think is normal for an older woman. And in a way, I had already started that because over the December break, I went with my grandsons and my daughter to one of these places that has trampolines all over the floor. And none of the other adults wanted to do it except my daughter and I. And we went out and because adults were allowed to do it too. And so the four grandsons, my daughter and I just bounced all over the place. And I'm sure I was the oldest person doing any kind of bouncing. And I'm sure I looked pretty funny. And I did fall a number of times, but it was just such a wonderful experience and so exhilarating. And I know that in the past I would have thought about, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. Will it look funny? Will people think somebody my age shouldn't be doing this, etc.? Nah, I didn't care. So that was one thing. And then the other thing that I've thought of that I will have to work on for a long time is to try to put less worrying into money, especially in these times. And with a variety of crises in our family life, I've been worrying about money a lot. And I'm just sort of thinking, what if I just kind of go along day by day dealing with things rather than constantly calculating the future and what will happen 5 years from now, what will happen 10 years from now. I'll just set that aside. So those are the two things. Thanks very much.
Thank you for sharing. I know on the financial side, I'm not at, but I'm nearing retirement. And, you know, you sort of have this combination of inflation and the stock market going down, future economic uncertainty. And I've made a policy of, I'm just not going to look at my 401k for months at a time. You know, I went through phases where I would see if the stock market was up or down on any given day. And it was fun when the stock market kept going up and up and up year after year. It used to boost my mood. But then it would obviously dampen my mood and cause me distress to watch all these ups and downs. And it's really nice to not even know how much money you have. Not everybody has the luxury to do that, but I have enough money set aside that unless and until I need to pull it out, I don't even need to know how much I have, and can avoid some of that money worry. Michael, I think you're on mute.
Speaking of worrying and money, fairly recently I read an article somewhere about how a lot of retirees are so worried about money that they spend their time clipping coupons and what have you, and living an austere life, and then they end up dying without spending their nest egg. And so that really struck me. And speaking of a bucket list, or kind of something sort of along a bucket list side, I have, I think, done a reasonably good job of not worrying about things like that, and just put more emphasis on enjoying my retirement rather than enjoying it now and tomorrow and next week, rather than worrying about my financial situation 10, 15, 20 years down the road, when I may or may not be at that point on the road.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Sheila.
Hi, everybody. I'm just starting to learn about the ageism in me and how I've thought about aging and aging in myself. And that's on my bucket list, to let go of some of these ideas that I've had about what it means to get old. It's really a lot that's surprising me about the way that I've thought about it. So I was at a concert on Sunday night. It was Classic Albums Live, Abbey Road. And I looked around, the place was completely full and everybody looked really old. Gray hair and a lot older than me. And I was in the lineup for the ladies' room, and I was talking to these two women, and they said, oh, we just love these classic live albums. And one said, my favorite is Dark Side of the Moon. And the other one said, my favorite is Led Zeppelin 2. And I was stunned. Like, I hope I didn't show that on my face. But then I realized after I got home, of course, these ladies know these albums just as I do. It was like a stunner that this is where I am now. And I'm just kind of a newbie with all of this, but I want to embrace it rather than be so afraid. And what goes with that is my physical body, my looks, everything is starting to happen now just since I retired. And rather than be afraid, I want to really embrace and enjoy and adapt. So that's a bit of the both sides of the list, but I've really appreciated all the comments here in the group and people sharing their lives and their journeys. And yeah, so that's what's happening on my end. Thank you.
Drew, you're muted.
I was thinking
Thank you.
about,
Mhm.
I
Go
was
ahead.
thinking about something Woody Allen said. He said, "I'm not afraid to death. I just don't want to be there when it happens."
Yeah, that's an interesting philosophical concept that we won't be there when we die.
And the
Uh,
other thing he said, which is very profound, he said, "I'm not afraid of death. No, the reason I'm afraid of death is because I've never done it before." And there's a lot of truth to that. I'm going to have another hip replacement, and I'm not half as afraid this time as I was the first time.
Interesting. Very good point. I'm just going to take people into share screen for a moment to go back to Sheila's comment. This is an article in the New York Times a few days ago. The coolest rock show in Ann Arbor. Almost everyone there is over 65. At the Geezer Happy Hour, the Silver Tsunami has been dancing for decades. And a lot of people, some people in this group may be baby boomers, maybe some are not, but it's been said that baby boomers kind of grew up during that countercultural late 60s, early 70s phase, and they wanted to do things differently than their parents did. And now that there's a kind of tsunami of baby boomers hitting their later years, they still want to do things differently than their parents did. They don't necessarily model themselves on the old image of, retirement as the golden years and whatever. What that will look like is something we're working on collectively and also individually. What do we make of these elder years? Let me take you into one of the share screen and just show you a chart of life expectancy from 1860 to 2020. So if we go back here, average life expectancy in the United States was 35. Let's go up to around 1900. Average life expectancy was 48. We go up to 2020, it's 79. It's actually come down, I think, 1 to 2 years from COVID since then. But from 1900 to 2023, there's been over a 30-year increase, or about a 30-year increase in life expectancy. It's not necessarily everybody's living 30 years longer, because there was a lot more infant mortality back in 1900 that would change those statistics. But it is an indication that our life expectancy and also the amount of time when we anticipate being healthy and vital has changed and expanded a good deal. So whatever we're doing in our society has been pretty darn good between medical care, public health measures, et cetera, in elongating the human lifespan. But it hasn't been necessarily as good at telling us what that is for, what the purpose of it is, what meaning that has in a human life. And we're going to be talking about that in a minute. Before we do so, any other comments in this first discussion? Bucket list. Okay, well, let me go into share screen for a little bit so I can sort of do some PowerPoint. So the first thing I'd like to do, I mentioned that I was going to kind of switch over from a Christian paradigm. So here is the story of how Siddhartha, a wealthy and very privileged prince in northern India, began his journey to becoming the Buddha. The Buddha is an honorific term meaning the awakened one. So his father had received a prophecy that Siddhartha, his son, would either become a very powerful worldly prince or a kind of otherworldly spiritual teacher. And like any protective father, he wanted to make sure his son had worldly success, power, money. So he wanted to make sure that Siddhartha became the former and not the latter, the worldly prince and not the spiritual master. So Siddhartha was brought up with tremendous privilege. Supposedly he had like 40,000 dancing girls and jewels and feasting. And he never realized anything about human suffering. And then one day he went out on the streets of his city and accidentally or by kind of divine manipulation, saw 4 different sights in a row. He saw a sick person. If you can see my cursor, here's the sick person. He saw an old person, and he saw a corpse being burned on the ghat, the kind of funeral pyre. So these sights taught him that in any human existence, there are these elements of impermanence and suffering, once again, that go along with aging, illness, and mortality. And, you know, I think probably in the course of our lives, we've all encountered our version of these revelations, whether it was a relative of ours passing away, or whether it was developing, you know, chronic pain or illness, or just, you know, feeling oneself getting older, and perhaps that fear of death increasing. These, in a way, this is an allegory of something that happens in every human existence as we may move away from that sheltered youthful mind to an encounter with the reality of life. For Siddhartha, this was powerful enough that it impelled him to leave the palace and to go off in search of a spiritual remedy. And in fact, the 4th passing sight he saw was that of a renunciate. It would have been kind of a Hindu person who had given himself over to meditation and devotion. And it taught Siddhartha the possibility of pursuing a kind of spiritual solution to these ills of human existence. So let's just keep that in mind, but also put it aside. And this is almost kind of a different version of Dickens, you know, ghostly visitations for Scrooge by Christmas past, Christmas present, and Christmas future. Once again, here we have these kind of visitations by different figures that Siddhartha sees. So let's put that aside for a minute. And I want to talk a little bit about how within our culture, we tend to think about how we can encounter sickness, aging, and mortality, and in certain ways keep it at bay or defeat it. How do we try to solve this problem of human suffering, particularly the sufferings associated with getting older? I'm going to just suggest, this is probably not all inclusive, but 4 different models of successful aging that are predominant within our culture. One of them I'll call the preventive model. Never quite sure whether the proper word is preventive or preventative, but I went with preventive. And this is really kind of focusing on the social and medical problems we encounter when we get older. So we try to do everything we can to safeguard our health, whether it has to do with diet, exercise, medications, seeing medical professionals. We also use whatever social services might help us as we get older. The second one, each one of these is going to start with a P. I'm going to call the prosperity model. That we really want to seek economic security and perhaps even wealth, but at least enough security to do what those financial planners recommend. You know, imagine yourself living into your 90s, make sure you won't run out of money, the kind of thing we were talking about earlier in the discussion. A third model is the productive model. Successful aging is really about maintaining midlife vigor and productivity as long as we possibly can, continuing to work, continuing to be sexually active, even if you need those erectile dysfunction drugs or whatever. That's a form of productivity. Seeking to be as contributory as we can to the larger society. So we maintain our sense of value and worth, and we maintain that sense of prolonging that kind of height of midlife vigor as long as we're able. A fourth model is kind of the pleasure-oriented model that this is a little bit like the golden years of retirement. You know, we've been laboring. Now we get to enjoy and spend the fruits of our labor. And, you know, you'll turn on the TV and you'll see ads for carnival cruises, you know, with older couples dancing on the deck, and lots of ways we could seek pleasure in our later years. So you can see on the right, I have problems with each of these models. But before going on to problems, I want to say that each of these, I think, has some value. And I'm guessing that to some degree, we're all employing elements of these. We probably do want to safeguard our health. And we probably do want to attend to our finances. And we may well want to continue being vigorous and productive, and also weaving in a lot of pleasure into our later years, you know, despite bodily challenges or financial challenges. So I'm not in any way seeking to negate these, but I also want to suggest ways in which these models are incomplete and deficient. And let me ask you, I think we have the dilemma of I kind of want to keep this on the screen, but it'll also have a discussion. So I can't really see digital hands. Maybe people would best just speak up. I'm not even sure I'll see you waving your hand because I only have a few people on the screen, but can anybody suggest any problems or limitations with any of these models as you know, a paradigm for successful aging? Sheila, you are one person who I do see your hand. There might be other people, but let me call on Sheila.
What's jumping out at me is the preventative. Well, it's so important, and I'm learning how to value and employ that more in these last years in my life after a lifetime of not taking care of myself. The family I grew up in, and I think the generation, doctor's word was gold. They never questioned anything. So now I'm really appreciating that I need to think for myself while also working with all of these people who have expertise that I don't have. So more and more I have to not I have to, I'm learning to trust my own instincts. So if I just did everything that professionals told me in my life, you wouldn't know me. I'd be locked up in an institution drooling somewhere in a corner. So
Yeah,
I'm learning to think for ourselves and be empowered to make our own choices. My husband is on cancer medications and he decided to half those pills. That's his decision. He's making that decision. And that's where we are. We need to make our own decisions so that we can live in a way that we've been empowered to. So it's a conflict. That's what
Yeah.
I'm saying. It's a conflict.
thank you.
Can be.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that the preventative model is often one problem or limitation is it's often associated with kind of turning our life over to professionals like medical professionals, as opposed to also attending to our own kind of inner wisdom, listening to our body. And I think there's a spiritual component to that kind of holistic self-care. I decided to take us off share screen, but I just put in the chat area these kind of 4 models: the preventative, prosperity, productivity, pleasure. Any other comments about kind of problems, limitations? Marian, sorry.
That's okay. Exercise is something that I'm well aware of is just so very important for so many reasons. And I find myself struggling with it more than I want to. I do exercise regularly. I love water aerobics and swimming. I love yoga. I do, but I have trouble motivating myself to do it as much as I really want to. And so that would be on my bucket list to keep that going. It just hits everything. It hits health, it hits sleep, it hits energy
Yeah,
level, the mood, and I know it. And yet, so many times I think, oh, I just don't feel like going in the water. I don't feel like moving around. So I have this conflict. But I mean, energy, exercise is just so preventative of so many things.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I was just seeing a medical article where they did a controlled study trial of the effect of antidepressants in terms of relieving depression, and exercise, actually aerobic exercise, in terms of relieving depression. And they were about equal in strength. And of course, exercise wouldn't have all the side effects that antidepressants have. So just one example of what you're talking about. Daphne?
Well, I'm sure I'm stating the obvious, but all of those models are very much about the physical, the outside of ourselves, and they don't really address our spiritual needs. And each of those models sets us up to fail, which is just typical in our culture. It's kind of embedded in our culture. Whatever stage of life we're in, we're supposed to be excelling at it. And we have got many, many experts who are happy to tell us how to excel. So I'm sure that's the direction we're moving in. I think having a spiritual life and a practice and being connected to some divine source is essential or helpful in all stages of our lives. But I really do think later in life, we have an opportunity to really focus on that and let go of some of this sort of trying to shape and control ourselves and our lives. That's the American myth, isn't it? The great American myth that we just work hard enough at it, we can achieve some, and I definitely, I have a lot of 20-somethings in my life, children and nieces and nephews, and I see from where I sit how toxic that is as well. That kind of acceptance that there are so many factors in our lives that are beyond our control. Our economic, social status, all kinds of things can happen to us that are completely out of our control. So that's kind of what comes up for me when I see those. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great point, though. As soon as you have a model of successful aging, it will, define other people as having failed at aging. And I certainly don't want people coming away from this workshop asking themselves, am I doing it right? Am I doing it well enough? I'm still having emotional problems. I'm still having physical problems, social problems. Therefore, I guess I have failed at yet another thing. So that's a problem as soon as you start having these definitions of successful aging. Really good point. I saw a couple of hands up. Carol?
Yeah, I think one of the keys that we need, and it is related to the spiritual, but as humans, we need meaning throughout our lives. And of course, as adults in the world, we get our meaning from forming families and perhaps having a profession and so on. But there's more to life than being productive in those ways. And so I always invite people I'm working with to think about what intrigues you at this time of your life? What have you always dreamed of doing that you never had time to do? And it's wonderful to explore those questions. And maybe I just wrote a short article about the fact that several of my friends who have been fellow university professors in music have all become visual artists, jewelry artists, painters, quilt makers, all kinds of ways of expressing their inner self and their imagination in ways that they never had time for before when they were being productive as professionals. And so I don't, there could be another P on here, Drew, which is pleasure. But what gives, oh, you do have pleasure.
I do have pleasure.
What gives you?
But I think what you're talking about goes beyond, just pleasure. It's creativity, self-expression, inspiration.
Right.
Yeah,
which have really important spiritual elements to them.
Yeah, thank you. I think I saw another hand up. Anybody?
Yeah, Deanne.
Deanne, yeah.
Seems to me we need somehow to work into that contact with other people. As you get older, it's easy to become isolated because, a lot of times you can't drive anymore. You can't get out and walk for miles, and it's sometimes hard to keep up contact with other people. And I think that's very important.
It is very important. Yeah. Social isolation, just putting on my medical hat again, social isolation has been shown by studies to be nearly as deleterious to one's health as smoking, and equally as deleterious to one's health as things like poor diet, lack of exercise, etc. So even on the level of kind of preventative health protection, it's very important to have community and friends. But once again, I think it goes beyond just longevity and health issues. It gives our life meaning. It gives our life that kind of richness of sharing and communion. In many ways, is just so central to the quality of one's life. And that's not present in any of these models. Let me take you into share screen again for a minute and go back to that PowerPoint. And I'll just show you, what are the list of problems that I compiled, some of which we've touched on, a lot of which we've touched on. So the preventative model, I kind of say here, success is defined as the negative of a negative, meaning it kind of starts with the notion that aging is really problematic. Aging is associated with loss, diminishment, pain, mortality. So successful aging is just trying to defeat that foe and keep it at bay as long as possible. And so it's a bit of a negative vision, even if we're trying to negate the negative. The prosperity model, well, once again, whether we can be successful or not may depend on the state of our finances. There's tremendous economic inequality in our society, we all know. So it's a bit shallow, self-interested, not a lot of focus on the things we've just been discussing. Service, spirituality, community, creativity. So productivity, I guess what I keyed on here is the notion that it doesn't really give those elder years any special meaning or purpose in the lifespan. It's as if all we're trying to do is take that kind of midlife vigor, vitality, and productivity that's so valued within our society and extend it as long as possible. Just like in the preventative model, we're trying to extend health and life as long as possible. But we've also been talking this month about something special about the elder years, special meaning, special purpose, that they're not just a continuation of trying to be 40 years old as long as possible. All those things about, well, 60 is the new 50 and, 70 is the new 60. Once again, as if success is defined by just being younger than we are, rather than accepting and working with our true age. The pleasure model, once again, well, may depend on your finances, how much you can take those trips or how much you can kick back in front of your fireplace. And it also seems a bit shallow and self-interested. It doesn't touch on some of the sources of deeper meaning that we've been discussing, including the artistic, the creative, the inspirational, and the communal and the spiritual. And as we've said, all of these models of successful aging is going to create a class of so-called failures, people who were not able to do this. They were not able to be productive. They reached a point where they had to retire because of physical limitations, or they're not prosperous. They don't have a lot of money in their bank account, or they're having significant health problems. So they weren't able to prevent that from happening. In using that term successful aging, I was drawing on a book that worked off of, I think it was about or more than 100 studies financed by the MacArthur Foundation about what led people to age, quote unquote, successfully. And it's actually a very good book. I don't mean to demean it, but they kind of say at one point, in some, we were trying to pinpoint the many factors that conspire to put one octogenarian on cross-country skis. There's the successful ager on the right, while others are in a wheelchair, the unsuccessful gentleman on the left. And I think this is problematic because it could be the person in the wheelchair has a deeper, more meaningful spiritual life than the person on cross-country skis, or is embedded in a deeper community of caring. We don't really know who is aging successfully. So we have to kind of redefine it. So I'm not, thrilled with this term, but what if we thought instead of successful aging of kind of spirit-led aging, using that notion of spirit and the spiritual in the broadest possible sense, not confining it to the religious, but using it as a shorthand term for that which has most meaning, what we feel to be kind of ultimate significance, and which may be connected to inspiration, and is accessed in a variety of ways for different people, whether it's prayer, meditation, walks in nature, listening to music, artistic creation, closeness and love shared with others. But those things we feel are of deepest meaning, that's what I'll call the spiritual. And here's where I want to use a kind of Hindu model. I'm calling it, the elder as kind of contemplative, once again, using that in a very broad sense. And in this Hindu model, well, one very culturally influential manifestation of it was codified, recorded, let's say, in a book called The Laws of Manu, that was written around the time of Christ. Once again, like Buddha's 4 sights, like Dickens, 3 ghostly visitations. In this Hindu model, there are really 4 different stages of life. At first, we're a student, learning how to participate in the culture, and under the guidance of a teacher, or in our culture, multiple teachers. And then we go on to that position of responsibility called the householder, where we may be building a family. We are productive members of the workforce. We may be supporting younger people, children. We may be supporting older people, elderly parents. So there's a lot of dharma, a lot of social responsibility on the shoulder of the householder, who is so key to the whole society. However, at a certain point, it's time to transition into what's called the forest dweller, which I'll describe at greater length. And then the last stage, which we won't deal with too much, is the renunciate. But there's a connection between the forest dweller stage and the renunciate. And the forest dweller stage is described here by that, in that text, The Laws of Manu. It's a very brief version, but right out of the text. When a householder sees his skin wrinkled and his hair white, and the sons of his sons, to take away the presumed sexism, we'll just say, when you see your grandchildren, then he or she may resort to the forest. In other words, it's time for that younger generation to take over all those heavy responsibilities and move into their job positions and raise their families and, kind of run things. The elder is now freed up to go into the forest. Let him always be industrious in reciting the Veda, which would be sacred scriptures of Hinduism. Let him be patient of hardships, compassionate toward all living creatures. In summer, let him expose himself to the heat of 5 fires, in other words, the blazing Indian sun. During the rainy season, live under the open sky, and in winter be dressed in wet clothes, thus gradually increasing the rigor of his austerities. Let him always wander alone without any companion. Actually, elsewhere it says that a husband and a wife could go off together. But there's a sense of a kind of contemplative retreat. Let him always wander alone in order to attain final liberation. And all that has been declared above depends on meditation, central practice within Hinduism. So when we look at this, there might be elements of it that are appealing and elements of it that are very unappealing. It certainly goes directly against the preventative model, where we do everything possible to preserve our health. If we're going to be exposing ourselves in the rainy season and winter. It certainly goes against the pleasure model if we're deliberately increasing the rigors of our austerities. It certainly goes against the productive model if we're going off into the forest and no longer pursuing all those social responsibilities. And it goes against the prosperity model. This is not somebody who's looking after their 401k. They're going into a kind of almost voluntary poverty. So let me ask you, given how counterintuitive this is, at least within our culture, why do you think this is recommended? Like, what's the point of this all? And we'll also be talking about what is the application of this, if anything, within a 21st century American context. How could it have meaning to us and sort of be adapted into what we wish to do within our own life? So I think I did see a hand up a moment ago, comments. Susan.
Frankly, I would sooner be put on an ice floe and freeze to death. I think this was attractive to some communities because it freed up resources. The old people don't have to be fed and watered and cared for, just gotten out of the way, make them feel they're doing something useful.
Okay, so I hear your kind of negative response to this model, but I also see what you put in the chat area, which if people haven't seen it, is sort of a positive spin on this model. You had a kind of monastic retreat. Your version of moving into the forest was to go into a retirement community, which opened up a kind of monastic element. Do you want to say anything more about why this was the best move you ever made?
First of all, I'm in a community. We care for each other. We're as social as we want to be. We have the medical care. We have, I go every day to exercise. We have entertainment. We have lectures. I have a very full life here. As if I had stayed in my condo. If I stayed in my condo, I think I would have died of boredom. This is a much better life for me.
Well, that's great. I think a lot of us, spend time worrying about what if I have to move out of my house? What if I have to join a retirement community? And who knows? That might, as you say, be open up some wonderful new experiences. And I will say, as a modification of the Hindu model, in actual fact, the way this is practiced in India, to the extent that some people still practice it, would not be to go off in isolation into the forest, but would be to join an ashram, an existing spiritual community. And certainly you can pursue your spiritual life in community with others. It's not all about retreat. But I will say, just to get the discussion going, that element of retreat is sometimes we need to withdraw from all the social connection and all the gossip and all the stuff on the internet and whatever, in order to find time and space to go within and kind of access messages from God, messages from our higher wisdom, our heart, however you define that. Carol?
Oh, I'll just reinforce exactly what you just said. You're ahead of me, Drew, as usual. But anyway, for me, the second half of life, or however the last third of life, however you want to characterize these years, is an invitation to go inward more, to do that deep end of life or moving toward the end of life work, to meditate more, to reflect more, to not be driven to be engaged in the community at the level that I have been as a younger person. So it's actually, for me, a real stage in my life where I'm gaining spiritual insights and ahas in ways that I never have as a younger person. I was too busy running around doing all the time. So I love the being part of my life now.
Thank you. Yeah, the transition from having, defining ourselves according to having, sort of the prosperity model, and doing, kind of the productivity model, to being. And what does that mean, to go into the essence of our being? Maybe that's something special about the later years of life that we were not able to focus on when we were raising children and advancing our career, et cetera, et cetera. Other comments about, oh, I see a hand up from Christine.
Yes, I have my hand up, but I just want to say Deanne had her physical hand up before, so maybe she should go before me.
Oh, that's kind of you.
Okay, and then I would,
Okay.
I want to ask a question after she's finished. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't always see everybody, so I can use help with that. Deanne?
I was just wondering, is this division of life, as it was, shown by the Hindu, is that maybe more of a reflection of their culture than it would be of our culture?
Well, I think it's fair to say that in India, there's always been this kind of cultural, not only openness to, but valuing of, and even almost supremacy of spiritual pursuits. And the notion, now I'm talking within Hinduism, there are many Muslims, et cetera, who live in India. But the notion, earlier it was said, one of the reasons we have such fear of death is because we've never done it before. Well, Hindus and Buddhists might respectfully disagree and say, no, we're on a reincarnational cycle. We've actually done this many times before.
Right.
And the way in which we escape from that is to realize the true end and purpose of life, which is spiritual realization of our divine reality, or of our divine self. And so, though in Indian culture, money and success is valued. I know I've had many Indian students at Loyola, at least some Indian students who, kind of like myself, growing up as a young Jewish boy, were told by their parents, be a doctor, be a doctor. You want to be a success in the world. So success is valued, pleasure is valued in Indian culture. Just go to an Indian restaurant and enjoy the array of flavors, or look at the Karma Sutra and the celebration of different sexual positions that can maximize the pleasure of men and women. But there still is a sense that the truest end of life is spiritual realization. And if you don't get it this time around, don't worry, you'll come back over and over again until you do. So whether that's relevant to your life is up to you. I agree that it's not essential within our culture, which tends to make money, celebrity, power, etc., our God. You can pull out a dollar bill, and on the back it says, "In God we trust." But I suspect it really means, well, actually, in money we trust. Money will keep us protected. Money will keep us safe. Money will establish our worth. But we're also kind of questioning those cultural values, especially in this session. Does that make sense to you, Deanne? Or
Yes, yeah.
okay, Christine, you had a question?
Yeah, I just have a question out of interest. I wondered what the difference between the forest dweller and the renunciate is, because it sure sounds as if the forest dweller has renounced an awful lot of life. So how much harder could it get? I'm just curious. That's all.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I've tried to figure that out as well. I would say in the forest dweller stage, you're deliberately going off into a kind of state of isolation or semi-isolation to, once again, recite the Vedas, meditate. Remember, it says be compassionate toward all creatures. So it's not really cutting yourself off from the world. In fact, earlier, Peter talked in the last session about our connection with the natural world and with trees. And I think there's some significance that Buddha sat underneath a tree when he attained the realization that made him the awakened one, the Buddha. And the forest dweller goes off into the forest, into the presence of the natural world in order to deepen his or her spirituality. But in the renunciate phase, interesting enough, you can come back into society. You no longer have to isolate yourself. And on the streets of India, you will see people who are, renunciates wearing their sari and little else. And you could, for example, become the teachers and gurus of other people. So having established yourself firmly within yourself, you can then rejoin the larger society. And this might suggest ways in which we could go on a kind of periodic retreat to deepen that inner spirituality, but then be able to come back and rejoin our daily life and hold on to whatever we've gained. And in a certain sense, this workshop has been trying to create that kind of space, kind of a communal retreat space for us to do that deepened reflection and then obviously go back into our everyday lives. Does that make sense, Christine?
Yes, thank you very much. Maybe
Right.
renunciate is just a bit of a misleading label for it, but I really like the idea of
Yeah.
going back into society and maybe trying to become a mentor, which to me is one of the important things
Yeah.
at this stage.
That's right. It reminds us of that session where we focused a lot on mentoring others. And by the way, when I introduce in this session this kind of contemplative move out of society, is meant to be in kind of a yin-yang balance to what we talked earlier about the value of remaining as a contributory member of society and mentoring others in our role as elder. Well, let me put you back into share screen and comment a little bit about this Hindu model and its possible meaning for us. So one way to view it is that as we get older, whether or not we kind of choose to go into the forest, so to speak, in a certain sense, we're pulled into some of these modes of retreat and austerities that are represented in the Hindu model, which in an American context would usually be defined as a series of losses and diminishments. Maybe the Hindu model helps us also to see the potentially liberatory nature of them. For example, even though we may not physically go off into the forest, we may feel like we no longer have those social roles that defined us when we were younger. That I'm the vice president of public relations at this firm, or I'm the parent of 3 young children. Now the children have grown up and they're independent adults. Now I've retired from my job. So we've moved away from the social role. Along with that, we may have lost some income sources and some status that was conferred to us by these roles within the society. We may, even if we're not voluntarily retreating from others and isolating, we may experience some elements of social isolation as our children grow up and move away, or we're no longer coming into work every day. Maybe we're a little more homebound because of physical problems. Even though we don't go off into the forest, we may find that it's time to move out of our home that we've been in for 30 years and, for example, join a retirement community. So there's a displacement. even though we're not choosing these kind of rigorous bodily austerities, they're upon us anyway. I'm teaching class today with a heating pad strapped to my back because I'm suffering from some lower back pain that's really been kicking up the last few weeks. So I'm undergoing these kinds of austerities, and you may well be as well in your body. However, once again, in our cultural context, these are just losses. But we also started to talk a little bit about how this kind of forest dweller stage of life, whether chosen or whether involuntarily thrust on us, as Carol said, it may give us more space and time for inner exploration. We're no longer going off to a job for 50 hours a week or rushing around picking up our children at soccer games and taking them to the pediatrician. So a little more time for that kind of inner work. Moreover, we may have more provocation for that inner work, because as our body is starting to fall apart, as we're encountering our mortality, our death, we feel it coming toward us, as we're letting go of all those social roles that had defined us, we're sort of left with the question, who am I really? Is there anything that kind of goes beyond those social roles, even goes beyond my physical body? And here's where I want to kind of get into this notion of the ageless self. Let me just see what time it is. I think we can go a little bit. Let me just think for a minute. Yeah, let me go through this. Once again, I mentioned a kind of meditation I wanted to do, and I was trying to figure out whether to do it before or after a break, maybe after a break. I think you had a pre-glimpse of what I'm about to show you, but what would it mean to kind of lean into some of these changes instead of resisting them, fearing them, suffering from them? Well, it could involve kind of voluntary simplicity, which is sort of a movement within our culture. Google it and you'll see what I mean. Once again, this is sort of an adapted version of going off into the forest, simplifying our life, taking advantage of some of this free time created perhaps by retirement, perhaps by being an empty nester, spatially, not only creating more time, but creating more space, clearing out some of the clutter that's accumulated from all those years of saving things and sticking them in the attic and putting out mementos on every available surface, possibly downsizing to a smaller, simpler living space, moving to a smaller condo or retirement community, and also consciously spiritualizing our life. Once again, I'm using the term spirituality in the broadest possible sense. I'm not identifying it just with religious practice, but this could take the form of actually using ritual. We're not very good in our culture on ritualizing significant passages. We do, for example, celebrate graduations from high school and college. But what happens when we retire? a lot of people these days, especially in the tech industry, they're just being fired by email. They don't even have a human conversation. If you work in an office, maybe there'll be a little 2-hour celebration with a little cake and a Amazon gift certificate. But we don't know how to really ritualize, for example, that transition from being the productive worker to whatever comes next. Maybe we need to come up with our own modes of celebrating and ritualizing these important transitions. For example, my second bullet point, perhaps taking a retreat to a special place and doing reflection, or participating in a workshop like we've been doing this month, which, you know, kind of has its reflective and ritual elements of really looking at the meaning of this later period of life and where we go from here. Also weaving into our daily life these more contemplative activities. And I list just a few, but you may have your own. In a sense, we can go into the forest on a daily basis by setting time aside for that kind of relaxed but conscious presence, and whatever makes that possible for us. For many people, meditation or worshipful practice is key. I say I'm not going to lead into religion, but I certainly don't want to negate that for many people. Their religious affiliations or their meditation practice is very significant. And also to switch over to the Jewish tradition, at least for a moment, honoring the Sabbath. And I mean by that, not necessarily observing in a strict fashion, you know, the Saturday Sabbath or the Sunday Sabbath in Christianity, although it could take that form. But it could be the notion of Sabbath is kind of like on the seventh day, God looked around at creation. He had worked to create the people and the animals and the world. On the seventh day, he just sat back and said, this is Tov, which is usually translated as good. He looked around at creation and said, this is good. It can also be translated as beautiful. He looked around and appreciated the beauty of creation. And thus was the day of rest for human beings, created in imitation of God's day of rest on the seventh day. And sometimes even in retirement, where we get incredibly busy, appointments, committees, helping out as a grandparent, etc. So being very purposeful about creating a Sabbath rhythm to our year, to our week, even to our day, etc., etc. Once again, sort of taking this Hindu model of the forest retreat and making it more relevant as a potential guide for one aspect of creative elderhood. Did I not have you in share screen? I'm so sorry. Let me put you in share screen for a minute to just show you. Hopefully you could follow it, but this is what we quickly went through visually, simplifying our life through all these transformations of space, time, and energy, and spiritualizing our life in all these ways I just mentioned. Sorry, I lost a little bit of control of what I was doing on Zoom. So we'll definitely come back to this after the break. And actually, maybe this is a good time to take a break. Janet, you have a comment?
Yes. There is an image that many of you have seen, I'm sure, from ancient Egypt, whether or not you've been there, seen in books about ancient Egypt, but they certainly believed in the afterlife. And there is one image that comes to my mind during this talk and thinking in a spiritual vein. And that is that in the afterlife, the image is of the spirit being there, being weighed by scale, I should say, not the being, but you go to be weighed to go on to the afterlife. And with that scale, you are being weighed according to how you have spent your life. And so on the one side of the scale is the heart of the person. And on the other side of the scale is a feather. And so we are to be judged, and according to this image, by what we have done in our life. And if we are passing over, our gauge should be, is your heart as light as a feather? It's a good image.
It's a beautiful image. And that image of the heart, that might be another name for what I'm calling the spiritual, that which opens up the heart in love, in connection with the divine. The love of beauty is something we've talked about. And sometimes as we get older, people come more from the heart than from the head. They may not be quite as articulate, they may not be quite as productive, but they may be quicker to cry, to become emotional, to express love. This is not always true. We know that just because you're chronologically an elder, it doesn't mean you embody elder wisdom and elder heart. Sometimes it's quite the contrary. People get more self-absorbed, people get more rigid. So it depends a lot on whether we do that kind of inner work and inner exploration that we've been describing, whether we are that heart-led elder. So before we take a break, which we will do shortly, other just kind of comments or thoughts that come up in relation to this kind of quick presentation I've been doing. Georgiana, I should say.
Thank you, Drew. I was really put in mind of you as you were explaining or talking about the Sabbath, that we've sort of secularized that a bit in our emphasis on gratitude. And it's a way that it's become, I think, pervasive in our culture. And rather than having necessarily overtones of any one particular religion, we kind of are all of us, I think, thinking more now of being in a kind of contemplative or meditative state and thinking about our gratefulness for the beauty of the world around us. And it seems like maybe that's a way that Jewish tradition has sort of filtered into our entire culture.
Do you feel like our culture is doing a good job of teaching and emphasizing that grateful presence? Because that surprises me a little bit. I would have thought our culture is doing a rather poor job of that, but
Well,
say a little more.
Well, I just think we're talking, I think as an idea, as a concept. I think if we, or at least for me personally, if I look at my lifetime, and I was raised Catholic and became a Buddhist, that was not a concept that was particularly foremost in my mind as a person growing up in my culture, to the degree that within the last particularly 5 years or so. Now, maybe that's because I'm becoming an older person and becoming more contemplative and focusing more on gratitude. But it's, I perceive it as becoming something spoken about more in our culture, maybe because our culture is not doing enough of it and needs it, or maybe because we're turning and doing it more in a secular rather than religious sense.
Yeah, I see what you mean, that there is more material, even in places like the Washington Post, et cetera, on the value of gratitude. And speaking of Judaism, it puts me in mind of the Passover Seder, which includes the celebration, the Dayenu celebration. Like if God had not led us out of the desert, and after each recitation of how the Jewish people were kind of saved by God from various trials and tribulations, you say Dayenu, which means it would have been enough. If only this had happened, it would have been enough. But on top of it, this happened, and that would have been enough. But on top of it, God did this. God gave us, manna from heaven. And each time you say Dayenu, even this would have been enough. And you go on to list all those blessings. And it's something I actually have a book. I'm not really trying to sell this book because it's out of print, although it's available on Amazon, used, called Games for the Soul, where I take different spiritual practices and I turn them into games that you can play in your everyday life. And I have a game called Dayenu, which I found myself using a couple of days in relation to this back pain I've been struggling with, where I just say, I'm able to walk my dog, Dayenu, that would have been enough. And to enjoy the beauty of the forest, Dayenu, that would have been enough. And I have these good friends, and I just remind myself of these blessings using the term Dayenu. Are there other comments, John?
I have not a chance to polish these comments, but when you spoke of or someone spoke of the concept of the Indian scale, where you weigh yourself against life awareness, my brain lit up. I have two sons and they have sons. And sometimes we're short on words and long on image. And I imagined this scale on a piece of paper that I quietly slid in front of them at the dinner table and watched what happened. This is all in my mind while you were speaking. And there would have been a staring down. My baby is 50. There would have been a staring down and an understanding, and then a recoil, and then a relook, and they say, wow. And they all would have had a wow that filled wow in their own head. They gave themselves the report card. There wasn't a long, protracted conversation. How'd you do on the scale, Jason? How'd you do on the scale, David? They already asked themselves that question. Where can I find a copy of that scale to fit on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper? I'd love to pass that around. Of course, I wouldn't take the test myself, but I would give it to everyone else.
I don't know, but thank you for sharing that.
Where should I search for that image?
Anybody know?
Oh, don't say Amazon.
Oh, everything's Amazon.
Okay, there's my answer.
Amazon is our new God who distributes all goods and services. Just kidding. It's great for everybody who is going other places other than Amazon. Marian, did you want?
Well, I just, short comments. Very interesting conversation. One really cute comment I heard is nobody ever fails at dying. I don't know, that comment just stuck with me. It's the one thing that nobody can fail at. So there's not really a comforting thought, but it's kind of a funny thought. And the other thing is Stephen Sondheim wrote a musical called Into the Woods. He's a great American composer that recently died.
Oh, right. Yeah, Into the Woods.
And into the woods. And it's also like a metaphor for not knowing what you find in the woods, going into an unknown place and experiencing things differently, seeing things from a different perspective. And I guess that's what I'm doing now. I'm into the woods. I'm seeing my life and my values very differently, and coming up with what most people are coming up with, that the things that seem to matter 10 years ago even just don't matter as much anymore. And it's more about spirituality and love, being a loving person, and committing to the family more. Interesting new thoughts that come from being so the forest could be like the woods, where there's all kinds of new experiences to have, not just being separated. You do separate, but you separate also from your past and what your past was, and see things in a different perspective. And the musical is wonderful. If anybody wants to see a brilliant, really brilliant musical that is just about that.
Yeah, thank you. I've seen it. It's enormously long if you do the entirety of it. And I had the privilege and the suffering of seeing my daughter perform in it when she was about 13. But I do love the element you introduced, that when we go off into the forest, we may be lost, we may be disoriented. We often have a great deal of fear of that. Who am I going to be after I retire, or after I move out of my house? You know, Susan said when she moved into a retirement community, it turned out to be a wonderful move, but you probably went through a period of concern or fear or disorientation. And so when we do these kinds of changes and explorations, we do have to be willing to go into the unknown. I know when I've gone even on a spiritual retreat, I've often gone thinking, I'm going to have a focus on this one issue. And then I discovered, no, the retreat is about entirely different issues than I had thought. You know, I'm being led in new directions, new questions are arising. So you go into the space of not knowing. So let's take a break. I don't want to weary everybody too much. We're almost an hour and a half into it. Shall we take I'm torn between 10 and 13 minutes. So how about a 10 and 15 minutes? How about a 12-minute break? On my clock, it's 2:28. So we would come back together 2:40 or whatever in your time zone would be the equivalent. So we'll go into the forest, we'll go into retreat, take a break, and see you in 12 minutes. Welcome back. I'd actually like to start the second half and really the last hour and 20 minutes of our month-long workshop with a little meditation. So I'm going to invite you to kind of follow the guidance that I'm giving, suspend a little bit resistance and disbelief. And we'll see if it ends up being of value or not. But it's kind of in the Hindu tradition. In the Bhagavad Gita, they describe 4 different pathways to the divine. The yoga of devotion, kind of love of a divine image, like the love of Christ or the love of Krishna. The path of selfless service, karma yoga, which was the path that Gandhi took. The path of meditation, Raja Yoga, probably most famous element within Hinduism and Buddhism, but also the path of knowledge or wisdom, kind of seeing deeply into our true self and ultimately the divinity of our true self, that which transcends the limits of our personalized mind and body. So this meditation would be part of that kind of yoga of knowledge or wisdom. It's obviously not something one achieves in 10 or 15 minutes, but it may be a little bit of a doorway to what they're speaking about. And in fact, the kind of teaching I'm about to give is called direct path teachings. The notion that we can let go of religious terminology and rituals and practices and go directly to the source with a capital S. And in fact, we don't need to access it through special spiritual experiences that are we achieve after years of meditation. We just need to go to our immediate experience. It's right there with us and in us all the time, albeit unseen and unnoticed. So let me start just with a moment of share screen. This may seem like a bit of an unusual approach to meditation, but I want to go back to the film we've been using of A Christmas Carol with George C. Scott. In fact, back to a moment we've seen previously. So we will review it. The Ghost of Christmas Past.
Congratulations. It's regulation, then let's get on with it.
Come. We shall be invisible and silent as the grave. You will now see a child, a youth. You will see yourself, Ebenezer.
The air is so clean. How different from the city.
Do you know where you are?
Of course, I was bred here. I was a boy in this place. That's Daniel Custis. Robert Estes. Hello, Daniel. The big one there, that's David Tyler. David, look here, it's Ebenezer.
I told you, Ebenezer. They can't hear you.
How happy they all seem.
That's right, they do. Yes, well, it's time to move on. Come along, Ebenezer. You know the way.
I could walk it blindfolded.
Your school.
I remember.
And it's Christmas Day.
There's a boy in there, neglected.
The boy is deserted by his friends and his family.
His mother is dead. His father holds him a grudge.
Why does his father hold him a grudge?
She died in childbirth. His birth.
Weep for the boy if the tears.
So I'm going to ask if you can summon up a memory from your childhood, whether it's a joyful memory or a painful memory. Just go back to being a child. And you know that this is you within the memory, just like Ebenezer Scrooge sees himself as a young boy. But the question is, why and how do you experience that continuity of identity? It can't exactly be through bodily similarity, because your body has changed enormously in size and shape, in age. It can't exactly be through mental similarity, because the thoughts you were thinking then, the beliefs you held about the world, have changed pretty dramatically over the course of the many years. Similarly, over the course of many years, but even over the course of days and weeks and moments, the thoughts that come in and go out of your mind are shifting. The emotions you're experiencing are shifting and changing. And yet you always experience that continuity of identity that enables you to know this was myself as a younger person, this is myself now. And I remember, I have a sense of the continuity of the experiencer. And this raises the question, who is that experiencer? Who am I fundamentally? Once again, whoever I am, it seems like it should remain. My essential nature should always be with me as other things are coming and going. And aspects of your body come and go and change over time. Aspects of your thoughts, aspects of your emotions, aspects of your social relationship, aspects of your role within society as you go through these different life stages. They can't be fundamentally and essentially who you are if they're coming and going and shifting. So what's left? Who am I? What is my essential self? And isn't it correct that ultimately who you are is the one that is experiencing all of this stuff, including the flow and changes in the world around you and the flow and changes in your body and your mind? Somehow beneath or behind, however you image it, of all these changing objects is the experiencing subject who is not identified with any one of those objects, who doesn't seem to be created by any of those objects, but who seems to be the experiential field in which all of that arises and disappears. Once again, returning to the film we've been watching, we've been commenting on different scenes that happen in Scrooge's life and the visitation of different ghosts. But the one thing we haven't really commented on or noticed is that all we are witnessing is unfolding on a screen. There's the empty screen on which the movie is projected, whether it's in a theater or in this case, whether it's on our computer. And that screen has to be empty. It has to be open in order for the images to play upon it, in order for the story to be told. But the funny thing is, all the time we're watching that movie, all we're ever seeing is the screen, not seeing anything other than a screen. The entire time we've been meeting on Zoom, we've really not been seeing anything other than the screen that we're watching, in which all these different people appear and disappear, and all these different messages are transmitted. And yet the funny thing is that while that screen is everywhere, it's kind of nowhere apprehended, because we're so captured in the images and the stories that play across that screen, we don't notice the empty and open screen on which it is projected. And let's use that analogy and say that subject, that experiencing subject who I essentially am, something like that empty open screen on which all the changing play of the world and of our own bodily, mentally, and social development has unfolded. And yet the screen is not within the movie. You won't see George C. Scott holding up the screen anywhere in the movie of A Christmas Carol. And we, as an experiencing subject, don't really appear in the movie, even the movie of our own life. We're the one who is witnessing it. We're the empty open space in which it unfolds. And if we ask ourselves, what can we say about that empty open space other than nothing? That it's not a thing that appears within the movie. It doesn't appear as an object. But there's certain things we can say about it. At every moment within our experience, it's always been now. We haven't lived a moment in the past or a moment in the future, even though in the now we might have memories, or in the now we might have anticipations. Nonetheless, we've never really visited the past or future. All of experience unfolds in the now. And that's not only true for ourselves as individuals, that's true for everybody. And that's true for our dog and our cat. And that's true for people who we were taught in history class lived in the past, lived in the 17th century, for example. They didn't experience themselves as living in the past. They always and only lived in the now. So living experience and all the world just appears and is examined through the lens of experience. It always unfolds in the now. And moreover, it always unfolds here. Anywhere you go, whenever you wake up in the morning, it's always here. Whenever you go for a walk, it's always here. And even though we can make distinctions between here and there, for example, if you hear a bird outside your window, you might say, well, that's over there. Really, you're experiencing the bird here. You're hearing it here. Just like on a movie screen, everything is here, even though there might be a landscape in the distance and a figure in the foreground. It's all unfolding here. And the funny thing about experience is it's always now, it's always here. Another way of saying that, to always be now, is to say that we don't really live in time. The now is not an instant in time. The now is that place of the experiencing subject in which time unfolds, just like the screen is that place in which the movie unfolds. The movie goes from beginning to end, but the screen is always there, changeless. And once again, though images may be in the foreground and the background, the screen always is right here. It's not really participating in the spatial relations portrayed in the movie. So something that's always here is not really part of time. It's outside of time. Time is within it. And what we call something that's outside of time, the word we have for that is it's eternal. The word eternal doesn't really mean something that lasts a really, really long time. It means something that's atemporal, outside of time. And the word for something that's outside of space, that doesn't have finite boundaries around it, would be that it's infinite or infinite. It's the space in which spatial relations, so to speak, unfolds. But you can't take your consciousness and say that it weighs 3 pounds or that it's 4 inches by 6 inches. Your consciousness does not have finite spatial dimensions. Therefore, we would say it's infinite. And so we've come to a place of conceiving that experiencing subject, which is who we essentially are, as eternal and infinite, which would mean participating in the divine. If you put the word now and here together, you coincidentally get the English word nowhere. And the difficulty of realizing this eternal infinite self is it's both everywhere. It pervades all elements of our experience. They're always presented to the experiencing subject, but it's nowhere to be found within the movie as an object. So it recedes from awareness. It's nowhere. But we would have to say this experiencing consciousness, it doesn't have a specific weight. It's not 138 pounds, for example. It doesn't have a specific color. It's not turquoise or polka dotted, nor does it have a specific age. Your experience of awareness doesn't really have any age. And this is why when you reflect on your experience as a child, it is continuous with your experience as an older adult, because you are always and only present in the now. That consciousness doesn't have a specific age. So from this way of looking at things, though this entire seminar has been devoted to understanding the life passage, the visitation of past, present, and future, the meaning of elder years, it may also be important to be in contact with a dimension of self that is ageless. And you might feel that within your ordinary experience, not just the special meditation, that my sense of self, my consciousness, my awareness isn't demarcated by my chronological age, even though this is how I'm viewed by other people, even though this is the body I see looking back at me in the mirror. That doesn't capture this essential self. So let me stop there. And I don't know if this, if you felt able to follow me, or if you felt any value in this. But I'd be interested in finding out any comments on this. Once again, it's called kind of the direct path way of just going directly to our essential self without years of meditation and special spiritual practices. Because it was a short process, I don't know how much value it had, and I'm not expert in leading this kind of process, but any comments about it? Did it resonate at all with you? And do you have any questions about what we were just doing, or what I meant by something, or any challenges to the kind of wisdom that was being presented here?
I
Carol?
thought it was
Yeah.
very interesting.
I'm sorry, who just spoke?
Well, someone
Deanne.
else was, yeah, this is Deanne.
Oh, Deanne, sorry. You thought it was
I
very
thought-
interesting.
I thought, yes, very interesting. All sorts of ideas I never thought of before.
Okay, I'm glad it had some value for you. Thank you. Carol?
I was just going to say thank you, Drew. That was an amazing experience for me. I've never had it before either. And it truly was a transcendent experience, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Cool. I'm really gratified. And I also don't want other people once again to say I'm a failure because I didn't have a transcendent experience. But it's interesting that it was powerful for you. Other comments, Marianne?
Well, for me, it was very interesting. I have done that practice before. It's kind of a meditation of yourself as the watcher, watching your mind. So you observe your mind without judgment. I learned that practice from Eckhart Tolle. He teaches about how you can have the third person watching, the third force watching the mind at work. And so you're not really part of the past or present, the past or the future. You're in the moment, in the present, just observing the experience. And it's a very good practice. I use it. And it's also for, good for not being judgmental when you think of something. Like I had an experience of my father going to the supermarket and taking a cardboard box and making a sleigh out of it. And I remember feeling very jolly. He would put me in the cardboard box and I would slide down a snow hill. We couldn't afford a sled, so he would just tear a box apart and sit me on it. And it was a very joyful memory type of thing. But observing it, I'm not, it made me feel that way, but not really judging the memory. I just had the experience of it without really.
Thank you. Thank you. And I put in the chat area the teacher in the book that you were referring to, wonderful books. I don't know how many of you know it. Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now.
Yes, read that many times.
Yeah. Vic? You may be on mute. And in a moment, I'll turn to a couple of people who have had their digital hands up. But
I
Vic,
think I'm out. I think I'm out of mute. Can you
okay,
hear me?
did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say that although I knew the concept and intellectually, I was aware of the experiencing self. To have the experience of the experiencing self and the continuity of it, and that meditation was very powerful for me, and I'm very grateful for it.
Great, thank you. Sheila?
Two things for me. I've never heard that before, or heard those kinds of words before in that way. And what it did was really validate that experience. Like I've had that experience. I know that place connecting to myself, but I didn't really understand it in that way. I don't feel like I have the words, but it was very helpful. And I'm understanding more about what's happening. Like we're here and now, that's the life, and it's not past or future, but it's here and now, and then there's eternal. So that was really great. And the other thing that really struck me was your exact words of who am I really? That was the experience that I had chosen for myself. I have an experience of when I was around 5 years old in the school playground. And I was told, but I don't remember it, but being told that I had been adopted and I didn't know who I was. And so I've had that's been the theme of my life, my whole life. Who am I really? But you've helped me to realize I had focused that so much on the physical, the biological, the cultural, like who am I really? But now I'm into more of the spiritual. So you just gave so much that opened up where I'm at and why I'm having some of the struggles and opportunities that I'm having. So I'm not sure that made sense, but it was a really powerful and wonderful experience. Thank you.
Thank you. By the way, I'm also putting in the chat area, this kind of practice and teaching really comes from this 20th century figure who was as significant in his own way as Gandhi, Ramana Maharshi. And he said the most essential practice in this path of wisdom or knowledge is working with that question, who am I? And going deeper and deeper, going beyond all of the, the bodily, the mental, the emotional, the social, the identifications. And finally, we discover something that outruns all of those, really becomes transpersonal. It's not just about our personal life narrative, our personal identity. It really connects us with, with what could be called the divine. Sorry, for some reason, my Zoom is being a little wonky. So I'm not even seeing who has their digital hand up. Could
Georgiana.
go right ahead and speak. Yeah.
I wanted to piggyback off of Carol's comment on it being a profound experience, because when she said that, I realized that it was profound for me and it was playful and fun and exciting, which I think all the really good, profound experiences often include.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And I mentioned that I wrote that book called Games for the Soul, like how do we make our spirituality playful and not a quote discipline, a spiritual discipline that we have to adopt. John, did you have your hand up? No. Okay, sorry, I didn't see that. So let me go into share screen again. We'll put aside that meditation, which may have been more or less powerful and intuitive for you. And I'll go back over to the PowerPoint and sorry. So let's, playing with this model of later life is also a time when we explore who am I really, who is the essential self, and we make a kind of contemplative space for this. Just want to pause for about 5 minutes, just like we paused at other points for some contemplative inward reflection. What kinds of time, places, and activities do organically or deliberatively open up a contemplative space for you? Am I making time for them as I age? And without any judgment, how could I? What might that look like if I leaned more into that? So according to my clock, it's 3:14. We'll be taking until about 3:18 if anybody needs to run to the restroom or something. Now, let's come back together. And I wonder if either verbally or posting in the chat area, if any folks would like to respond to this, what came up for you? What are your practices, or what might be your practices to help open up this space? Marion?
Well, for me, honestly, once a week, usually on the weekends, I'll go out with my husband and we'll have a few drinks. And I find that alcohol and relaxing and going to a social place, just listening to music sometimes, but being out and just mixing with the nightlife, that'll do it for me. I can eventually relax enough and some new thoughts and perspectives will come to me that way.
Thank you. So it's nice, a nice application, although a nice contrast with that Hindu model of going off in solitude, that actually being with others helps open up that space. Ina, I see, and Christine, and Susan have posted in the chat area. We might take a look at the chats that are appearing. Being by water. What else? What else sort of do you use or might you use for that kind of contemplative exploration? Once again, either in the chat area or verbally. Vic? I think you might be on mute. I'm still not hearing you, Vic.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think
there
you
you
should
are.
hear me now. Sorry about that.
Mhm.
I just stayed with your question, who am I? I kept on asking myself that and asking myself that. And then kind of organically, I moved into who's asking, who am I? Who's asking, who am I? And that
Who's asking who am
things
I?
even.
Yeah,
Yeah.
It was really, I didn't see that coming. It's pretty cool. It's
that's
very,
interesting, going back and back to
who wants to know? Who's asking?
it's interesting in the Hebrew Bible, when God is asked his name, you may remember he says, my name is I am that I am.
Mhm.
In a way, that's what we're saying. We go back all the way from who am I to I am, not having, not doing, not particular age and characteristics, but participation in being.
Yeah.
And different spiritual traditions say that participation in being has a divine element, a transcendent element. So I'm seeing some wonderful chats appear. Maybe because we're talking about meditative practices, it's nice to just quietly post in the chat area rather than even verbalizing it. Anyone else with a comment about your practice? Okay, well, Daphne.
I just had a thought. I wanted to just elaborate a little bit on my comment, which was that I've, for the first time in my life, actually have a room for myself that's not where I sleep. You know, I don't share it with anyone else. And it's exciting, you know, because I can be a bit of a doer, you know, and then, you know, if I'm in the rest of my house, I'm just doing, you know, instead of being. So I think for me that really helps focus and center. I go into the room and this is the place where I, you know, can devote time for self-exploration and meditation. And so it's exciting. The only other thing I would say is I'm still working full time, and I find myself longing to work part-time because I feel like Tuesdays are a gift for me. This was such a gift to have this space. I work in a public library, and I happen to work a split shift on Tuesdays, and the quality of my attention and my energy are so different than after a long day at work, you know. So finding ways to devote more quality time in my life to this is really important to me. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, you sort of articulate the value of sacred spaces like your room, and sacred times, like the Sabbath time, or and as you say, working part-time allows you in a way to part-time and create more time to be and not just to do. Anyone else? These comments are so valuable. Carol.
Years ago, I was playing with what I call the doing being paradox. And I had developed this kind of elaborate map for identifying where I was in this doing space, or just being quiet. And a Buddhist friend of mine said, Carol, in Buddhism, we say, my doing comes out of my being. And that was such a powerful way of my thinking about that, as not being paradoxical, but of being integrative. So what is my being? Who is this being right now? And you took us into the eternal being, but it helped me to integrate rather than to look at this in a polar way. So anyway, I have spoken.
Beautiful comment that it's not that we stop doing necessarily, but that our doing flows more from that deep place of being. Although sometimes it is important to not overdo it, as we say, because we live in such a doing culture. And I want to speak, at least theoretically, I can't say I've done this, but the value of, instead of always writing a to-do list, write a not to-do list. The things that you don't really have to do today, in such a way that you are actually creating time to be. And maybe we would feel less guilty about that if we created a list of the things to not do. It's kind of like the part-time work, creating time for whatever it might be, that time when we go for a walk, or we sit in silence, or Christine?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to mention that one of the things that what you said, Drew, made me think of, and also the experience of the contemplation, was the fact that during my life I've had, and particularly recently in the last decade, but also earlier, I've had a few of what I would call transcendent experiences, but they have been almost entirely in relation to another person. So, and what it has given me, like a quiet moment with another person, is a sense of boundarylessness, so that I feel more that I'm not just kind of me encased in a skin, but rather, as I know some very learned people have said, that the notion that I'm separate is an illusion. And I don't experience that very often, but I have experienced it, but it's mostly, as I say, in relation to another person, that kind of sudden insight. Oh, I'm not really separate from this person. Or in some cases with an animal, I'm not really distinct from this animal.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that's related to what you're saying, but that's
Yeah.
just what it made me remember. Thank you.
It is totally related to what I'm saying, because in a way, when we get to that place of the experiencing awareness, it doesn't quite belong to us as a separate individual. All of us are participating in that same open space. And so when we feel that great sense of communality and closeness with another person, that experience of love, love in action, not romantic love, but loving connection, I think it does transcend the boundaries of the separate self. Ram Dass, who was a wonderful spiritual teacher, some of you may be aware of, used to say that experience of being in love, when we use that term, I'm in love, we usually mean it in a romantic way, like I'm in love with this particular girlfriend or boyfriend. But when you look at the terminology, it's really saying I'm in this place called love. I'm dwelling in a space called love. And this one individual happens to trigger that experience. Like for you, Christine, that was triggered by connection with certain specific individuals at certain times. But the spiritual idea would simply to be in love, to just be in that experience of continuity and communality. And, I find that when I go walking my dog and I start chatting with other dog owners, in a funny way, that's being in love with each other, because we immediately just meet and share stories. And that doesn't mean you'll ever see that individual again. But the more we can have those experiences of loving connection just with whoever we come across in our life, that's certainly a deep spiritual expression. Carol's giving that the thumbs up. So going back to time, leaving behind the eternal for the moment, I realize there's about a half an hour left in our time together. And of course, really the course has been about time. It was called The Time of Our Life. And I want to just take you back using that PowerPoint device in what we've covered. And after this meeting, Ruby is kindly going to send out, although wait a few minutes, Ruby, until I've transmitted stuff to you. But we'll send out this PowerPoint. We'll also send out a PDF version of it. Not everybody might have PowerPoint installed on their computer. You may be familiar with PDFs. They are openable not only by special software like Adobe, but I was told a lot of browsers like Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge will open PDFs. So that might be another format, but I just kind of want you to have a reminder of this material, because some of its value, some of its reflection might not have happened immediately this month, or you might have had to miss sessions, but it might continue to unfold. So that said, let's just go through what we've talked about this month. And as we do so, I'm going to ask you to ask yourself, going back to that notion of kind of Netflix, 3 things, what might be 1 or 2 or 3 things of particular value to you, particular meaning to you, that you might want to hang on to, play with in the future, and maybe share with others before we close? Because I'm hoping either in the chat area or verbally, all of us, or at least a lot of us, will have an opportunity to kind of share a takeaway that they experienced from what we've done together. So let's see, on my PowerPoint, I'm going to go back to the beginning and I'll say, play from start. Obviously, I'm going to go through this very quickly. We talked about recontacting with joyful experiences from our childhood. And what was the value about those? Why have they stayed with us? How do they continue to guide us? But also painful memories, particular experiences of trauma, neglect, or whatever. And the doorways that can release us such that we're not trapped by those painful memories. Forgiveness of self, forgiveness of the other, holistic integration. And we went on to that theme of kind of the elder as mentor, having a certain kind of wisdom from life experience, cultural experience. And are there ways where we've had examples of that in our own life and benefited from it, and want to maintain gratitude for the people who have helped to guide us, and how can we also do that for others? Where are there ways where we do or we could mentor, care, and support others, and be a contributory mentor or steward to the world in our elder years? Whether or not our society has marginalized us or defined us as non-productive, maybe there's a very special kind of contribution we still have to make. Then we looked at our relationship to time. Do we just live in the past or always in worry or anticipation of the future? This is not always negative. There are positive aspects to memory and expectation, but it can also stop us from living fully in the present. So we looked at the importance of joy snacks, and we looked at the importance of experiences of beauty, and how is it that we can remain fully present to our life and present to the people around us? We did a little meditation on that, and there was this quote unquote homework assignment to all the very many different ways we could be fully present to life, and valuing the moments of life that remain to us, even if our life, or even because our life is growing shorter, it teaches us to value it more. We talked about how aging realistically has a lot of challenges and losses, but also gains on the level of the body, on the level of changes within our world, and our whole relationship to time, things we lose, but also the things we gain. And once again, in relation to time and in relation to the ghost of Christmas future, what is it that we may be inspired or released to do in our later years, using the poem by Jenny Joseph and this notion of kind of what's on our bucket list and what's on our fucking list. And then today we transitioned a little more to this theme of some of the benefits, but also a lot of the limitations of our usual models of successful aging, and replacing it a little bit with the notion of kind of spirit-led aging, and with a special focus on kind of working with rather than resisting and fearing all the changes that are coming about, and using it, potentially to provoke a contemplative deepening of being rather than just doing. So in a nutshell, that's some of the stuff we've been talking about. And yeah, Vicky. So yeah, we are, Ruby will be sending out the PowerPoint, and once again, a PDF version of it, just as a reminder. And I wonder if people would be willing to share verbally and or in the chat area, especially now that we're coming to an end. It would be nice to hear from as many people as possible, given that we have 20 minutes left, so we have to keep sharing very laser and brief. Any particular thing that stood out for you as meaningful or valuable from this month? Anybody? Once again, feel free to type it in the chat area or to share verbally. Some people are more or less comfortable kind of just voicing things. Marianne?
I guess for me, the most important thing was I don't feel so alone with everything as I did before the 4 sessions. I feel that I'm going through things that other people are going through, and I just don't feel so isolated and afraid of everything. And there were a lot of ideas I got, but the main feeling I think I got was less feeling isolated and afraid of growing older.
Great. And we really have been, I think, a community. In a certain sense, the community will dissolve, I guess, in 20 minutes. In another sense, there's a wonderful ongoing community provided by Saging International and all the programming they have. And just, that sense of a community we have with one another that will surpass the boundaries and limits of the particular time we spent together. So I'm glad you feel that way. Georgiana?
For me, Drew, the whole idea of Christmas past, present, and future was such a creative way to kind of stimulate your mind to open itself to kind of a different view of thinking about all those parts of your life. And it's kind of like a reconceptualization that freed me up to think about it in a different sort of way. So I really loved that you cast it in that way. It was really a helpful way to kind of, I think, push you out of the normal ways you looked at things.
Thank you. And I'll pass on a lot of the credit to Charles Dickens, right? Because he was the one who designed these ghostly visitations, really designed for all of us. But I appreciate your kind words. Other little reflections about what's meaningful for you? And I see a chat, a nice chat from Christine. And I certainly agree with you about the profound sharing that people have done during our time together. So what else? Sheila?
Well, I can say that this has been an experience of loving kindness and connection for me. And I wouldn't have thought of a workshop like this in person or on Zoom in that way. It's just broadened my understanding of what loving kindness and connection can mean, because it's included so many differing opinions, some disagreeing, like all of the above. It's been a really wonderful experience of safety while people have brought their authentic selves to the room. So that's been really powerful for me. Another is about being an ancestor. Like, I never thought of myself, I never even identified with that word at all because of not having children or grandchildren. And it's all of this has helped me to kind of catch up with myself. I always felt I was behind. I had to make up for lost years and decades and lost learning and lost skills. Like, I always kept on seeing myself that way. And I just need to learn how to be more. It's like, hey, I just need to just be more. And even being retired, I'm like, what am I doing? What do I need to focus on? Hey, I'm going to just be a little more and let my body do whatever I need to do at this stage. So it's been really wonderful. I feel caught up today with all of you, and I would have never imagined being able to say that before. We're not all on the same path and on the same place, like, but I don't feel like I'm behind and lagging, you know. So it's been a real gift in so many different ways, and I'm just so glad that I stumbled into this course. So here I am. I'll be attending more with Saging International, and with you, Drew, also, if there's more courses that you're doing. I've just so appreciated. There's been a calm and an authentic gathering and just an opening for the hearts to come in. And I came in, and I thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you. Very beautiful sharing, and you've been a wonderful contributor. And it is cool. I'm glad you experience, and I hope others have, this sense of community, even over Zoom, which is as cold and distant an interface as you can get. But maybe it's testimony to the sense that it's not really about time and space. On the computer screen, we're each separate from one another in our own tiny little box with our own little name label. But we're all part of the same unified screen, the same unified shared experience. So all that distance kind of melts away. Thank you. Michael. I think you're muted.
For me, this has been helpful in my thinking about how to move forward with my life. I do think in terms of moving forward. And then I ask myself, what exactly does that mean? How do, at this point, I lead a purposeful life? How do I live a satisfying life? How do I, if it's possible, make the world a slightly better place by having been here? And this workshop has made me think about that from a number of different perspectives, from my past, how that makes me the person I am, how living in the moment, and also how I can plan my future and strike a balance between doing things that I want to do and not doing, and being okay with not doing, whereas I've been used to being busy all the time. And, I've just reached a point where I'm tired of busyness. So in that regard, it's been a very good workshop for me.
Yeah, thank you. As you were talking at the very end, I was thinking the word business, this very business-oriented culture. The word business simply means busyness, being busy. And what an opportunity if in our life, we don't have to be busy all the time. It's scary. It's kind of like going into the forest. In some ways, it's more comforting, familiar, and easy just to be busy, just to keep busy. And sometimes that's the message to older people. Let's say they're in a retirement community or a nursing home. Come on out. It's movie night. It's Wednesday. Socialize, do this, go to this class, be busy. But maybe we're not always meant to be busy. So what else has stood out for people? What's a takeaway message for you? Daphne.
Well, I'm really grateful. I'm grateful, to you for offering this workshop, and I've learned so much from everyone who has shared. It's that combined wisdom. Things will come back to me during the week that someone said. It'll spark a new idea or a new behavior. I especially benefited from the enhancing the present homework. I think it's that habituation, doing things the same way I've done them because I'm just busy. And one of my daughters has a seizure disorder, so I find myself driving them to work on a very busy highway here in the Boston area. And one day during that week, I realized I could put, instead of listening to NPR, I could put Krishna Das on my phone, and I'm driving on what's considered some of the deadliest section of highway in the country, 95. And I actually did have a transcendent experience one day, singing and feeling one with the traffic, which is pretty extraordinary experience if you are accustomed to driving in an urban setting. And it's just priceless, these kinds of opportunities to connect with others and share the ideas and spark new thoughts. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. By the way, I mentioned Ram Dass, and he and the person you mentioned, Krishna Das, who is a wonderful chanter. That's his method. We're disciples of the same guru over in India. And Ram Dass tells a story about how he's dead now, but told a story about how he would drive down the road and he would just chant a Krishna mantra. He would get so high, he would get so connected with the divine, but he would drive kind of slowly. And one day a cop pulled him over for that. And the cop was dressed in blue, which is the color of Krishna. So Ram Dass just looked at the cop and experienced him just as Krishna, just in his divine identity, and was so in love with the cop. The cop didn't know how to deal with it. He finally just said, "Oh, just go on your way. I'm not going to give you a ticket." But I loved your story, Daphne. I see a message from Susan on the chat. Are there little nuggets, little takeaways for you? Okay, so shall we finish up? Since we've been in a bit of a Hindu mode today, after traveling along the Christmas story with Charles Dickens, maybe we can close with the Hindu greeting and goodbye. I think we've used previously. I'll put it in the chat area, namaste. And you kind of bow and say namaste. And it basically could be translated in long form as I honor the divine energy within you. Thanks for your wonderful message, Sheila. I guess that was sent to me. I honor the divine energy within you, which I also recognize to be one and the same as the divine energy within myself. And I honor, in a certain sense, a piece of God or spirit, universe, being, however you would define it, has met with and communed with and shared an experience with another piece, with another manifestation. It was a sacred moment. And for me, it was a really special time to be with everybody. I'm starting to get emotional. But it was really valuable. Tell you the truth, it was a lot of work to put this together. I'm not sure I'm going to get a lot of money out of it. But it was someone once told me, you teach best what you most need to learn. And I'm sort of a slow learner. So the only way I really learn something is by trying to teach it to others. But these definitely were also messages for myself. And it was wonderful to kind of share that journey with all of you. And I certainly hope I will be seeing you again. If you choose to be in touch with me personally, I hereby give Ruby full permission to give anybody my email, which is just my first letter and last name, dleader@Loyola, LOYOLA.edu, the university I teach at, Loyola. So shall we say to one another, shall we bow to one another and say namaste, and can turn to different people on the screen. Namaste.
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 Okay, well, thank you so much. These 3-hour sessions, it's a long time to hang in there. So I appreciate all of you for your persistence and your energy. And have a wonderful life.
Oh.
Thank you.
I feel like we should end with some message from Dickens, like, God bless us, everyone. Tiny Tim will live. So thank you so much.
Thank you.